Колеги, доброго ранку. Розпочинаємо.
Morning, colleagues. We are starting our working day from the press briefing of the Speaker of the Ministry of Defense, Viktoria Kushnir, the Speaker, still acting Speaker of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Vladyslav Seleznyov, and via Skype, the Speaker of the Anti-Terrorist Operations Staff, Anatoliy Stelmakh. Good morning. I'm glad to see you at the briefing. Yesterday, the President of Ukraine, Poroshenko, submitted to the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine the draft law on increasing the number of the armed forces of Ukraine up to 250,000 persons. The increase is needed so that the armed forces can exercise their functions of defense of Ukraine, protection of its sovereignty, territorial integrity. The draft provides for approving the number of armed forces of Ukraine at 250,000 persons. Out of them, 204,000 are military servicemen. The draft provides that during this special period, the number of armed forces of Ukraine will be increased to the number of the personnel which is recruited to exercise the orders of the President of Ukraine on mobilization. Also, the head of the state signed the law on introducing amendments to the tax code of Ukraine on taxation of the products of defense nature. The document removes potential possibility to supply such products from countries which is defined, recognized as the state occupant or the state aggressor in respect to Ukraine or from the occupied territory of Ukraine. At the same time, the obstacles are removed to real tax-free import of products of defense nature to the territory of our state. Also, 155 million 283,000 hryvnias were received as part of the action support Ukrainian army. Out of that, some 142,181,000 are the money transfers for material technical support and 13,102,000 for medical support of the armed forces of Ukraine. The status of the participant of military actions was received by 8,488 servicemen of the Armed Forces of Ukraine in the Intersectoral Commission of the State Service of Ukraine on veterans and participants of ATO. There are materials for 3,235 servicemen on recognizing them as the participants of the military actions. According to the data of the Chief Department of Defense and Mobilization Planning of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the first stage of the fourth wave of mobilization is executed by 90%. In the training establishments of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, there are now courses conducted on renewing the knowledge and skills, upgrading the professional skills of the officers of reserve. Practically all commanders of the educational units and instructors have the experience of ATO. In total, 90% of the educational and training time is dedicated to practical classes. During the practical classes, the mobilized personnel execute the exercises on shooting and shelling from the grenade launchers, firearms, and so on. We would like to emphasize again that every mobilized person before going to ATO will be provided with the helmet and the armored vest. We would like to address the relatives and volunteers. Do not panic. The servicemen will have everything they need to provide psychological assistance to participants of ATO and members of their families, organization of psychological rehabilitation and social readaptation. In the armed forces of Ukraine, there are the units of psychological service. The issue of providing psychological assistance to the participants of ATO is one of the primary tasks of the Ministry of Defense. On the basis of the Military Medical Clinical Center of the Western region in Lviv, there is a room of psycho-emotional relax opened. 29 sponsors helped organize this room. Thanks to this room, the patients will be able to morally and psychologically have rest, to talk to their relatives, and with that, according to the doctors, the process of rehabilitation will be much faster. These are the short results of the activities of the Ministry of Defense during the last 24 hours. Also, I would like to invite now Vladyslav Seleznyov, and then we'll have Skype connection with Anatoliy Stelmakh. So first we will hear from Anatoly. Anatoly, good morning. Good afternoon, good morning. So what was happening during the last 24 hours in ATO? Today's night in the zone of ATO was relatively quiet. Starting from 9 o'clock, the enemy chaotically and provocatively was shelling at our positions, mostly from the firearms. Close to Donetsk, the terrorists twice were shelling at our stronghold near the coal mine Dutovskaya. In Artemivsky direction, they were shelling at Mironivsk and Mayorsk, but this night, using the tactic of the fire from the mortars, the bands were shelling at Avdiivka. During the night, starting from 21 o'clock on the 2nd of March till 5 o'clock on the 3rd of March, the enemy was 6 times violating the ceasefire regime. At the same time, in the evening of the 2nd of March, we saw certain activation of military actions of terrorists. In the next direction, around 7 o'clock in the evening, the Pisky were shelled at 2010, from Zenit system, and at 2030 from the tank. They were shelling at Avdiivka. Around 8 o'clock near Sokolniki in Lugansk region, there was a military clash. According to our data, only non-controlled bands entering into fire contact. Good morning. As my colleague Anatoliy Stelmakh mentioned, during 24 hours, the illegal bands in the east of Ukraine 22 times were shelling at the positions of ATO. At the slides, you will see the dynamic of the shellings in the sectors. Here are the violations of ceasefire in Lugansk direction. During the 24 hours, there were 2 shellings near Krymsk. The militants twice were shelling at our positions near Krymsk from firearms. In Donetsk direction, that is to the south from Donetsk, near Berezovo, the militants were shelling from mortars at our positions, which are located near this settlement. The most difficult situation is in Donetsk direction, near Donetsk airport. That is where the militants were shelling at our positions, which are located near Pesky, Opetne, Shafta, Dutivsk, and Avdiivka. You can see the dynamic on this slide. the violation of the ceasefire in Artemivsky direction. There were 4 shellings during 24 hours. The militants were using the Zenit systems, the firearms and automatic grenade launchers, and they were shelling at our positions, which are near Troitsky, Mironivsky, Lugansk, as well as Mayorsk. During the last 24 hours in Mariupolsky direction, there was 1 shelling at our positions. The militants were firing at our units, and yesterday at 12:40 there was a clash near Pavlopol, but the attack was repelled. Our forces continue to maintain the forces of the enemy on the territory of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. All the actions are executed according to the plan. Are there any questions? Good morning. Channel 5 from the morning. In the morning, there was an information that 3 Russian convoys entered Ukraine. This is the information which are followed by the bodies which are part of anti-terrorist operation in order to monitor the situation and to inform the monitors from OSCE mission about that. Any other questions? Thank you, Anatoly. Have a good and quiet day. Thank you, Viktoria. Thank you, Vladyslav. Our next briefing is at 11. Reform of the school educational system in Kiev.